The transformation of Earth's industrial capacity happened with a speed that amazed even the humans themselves. President Rodriguez had authorized Operation Steel Shield just 72 hours after the Confederation's desperate plea for help, and already the planet's manufacturing centers were working around the clock. Factories that had been producing civilian goods were retooled for military production. Shipyards that had been building exploration vessels now focused on warships. The entire economic structure of human civilization shifted into what their ancestors would have recognized as a wartime footing. Lieutenant Colonel Emma Wright stood in the cargo bay of the transport ship ECS Mercury, watching her team of military advisors prepare for deployment to Confederation worlds. These were Earth's best tactical instructors, combat veterans, and strategic planners. Their mission was simple in concept but terrifying in scope. Teach an entire galaxy how to fight a war in less than 6 months. Emma had read the psychological profiles of the Confederation species during the journey from Earth. The Xanthari were natural diplomats who became physically ill when exposed to violent imagery. The Vaxan were intellectual beings who approached every problem as a puzzle to be solved through logic. The Keepers of Nyx were spiritual entities who believed violence corrupted the soul. None of them had any experience with actual combat, and most found the concept deeply disturbing. The Mercury's destination was Zentara Prime, the Xanthari homeworld and military headquarters for the hastily organized Confederation Defense Force. As they approached the planet, Emma could see the confusion through the viewports. Thousands of civilian ships were being pressed into military service, but they looked nothing like warships. Elegant passenger liners tried to mount weapon systems designed for completely different hulls. Cargo vessels attempted to install armor plating that made them too heavy to maneuver properly. Ambassador Veltar met Emma at the spaceport, and she was shocked by the change in his appearance. The graceful, confident diplomat she had met at Harmony Prime now looked exhausted and frightened. His pale blue skin had taken on a grayish tinge, and his large eyes showed the strain of sleepless nights. "Colonel Wright," he said, his melodious voice now rough with fatigue, "I confess we do not know where to begin. Our people are willing to learn, but the concepts you humans take for granted are alien to us. How does one teach beings who have never known violence to become warriors?" Emma had been asking herself the same question during the journey from Earth. "We start with the basics, Ambassador. Survival instincts exist in every species. We just need to channel them properly." The first training session was a disaster. Emma had gathered 50 Xanthari volunteers in what had once been a conference room at the Planetary Defense Center. She began with basic small unit tactics, trying to explain concepts like cover, concealment, and fields of fire. Within minutes, half the Xanthari were showing signs of severe stress. 3 of them actually fainted when she demonstrated the proper way to aim a plasma rifle. Emma quickly realized that traditional human military training would not work. These beings had evolved beyond their aggressive instincts through centuries of peaceful civilization. She needed a completely different approach. "Forget everything I just showed you," she told the remaining Xanthari. "I want you to think of this as protecting your families. The Devourers are not soldiers you're fighting. They're a natural disaster that threatens everyone you care about. You're not learning to kill. You're learning to save lives." The change in attitude was immediate and dramatic. When Emma reframed combat training as disaster response, the Xanthari began to understand. They could accept the need to destroy machines that threatened innocent beings. They could learn to use weapons if those weapons protected their children. Similar scenes were playing out across dozens of Confederation worlds as human advisors worked with every species in the Alliance. Major Kate Wilson discovered that the insectoid Klaxi were natural fighters once they understood the threat to their hive-minded communities. Captain Danny Morgan found that the energy-based ethereals could manipulate electromagnetic fields in ways that made them devastatingly effective against machine opponents. Meanwhile, engineer Pete Johnson was working miracles in the orbital shipyards above Zentara Prime. The Confederation had industrial capacity that dwarfed anything humanity possessed, but they had never applied it to military purposes. Pete's job was to retrofit their civilian vessels with human weapon systems, while maintaining the advanced propulsion and defensive technologies that made Confederation ships superior to human designs in most respects. The first successful conversion was a Vaxan research vessel called the Infinite Inquiry. Pete's team had managed to install human plasma cannons and missile batteries while preserving the ship's advanced sensor arrays and quantum shielding. The result was a hybrid design that combined the best of both civilizations. The Confederation ships are faster and more maneuverable than ours, Pete explained to Admiral Clark during her inspection tour. Their defensive systems are decades ahead of human technology, but they've never needed to think about weapon placement, armor angles, or combat maneuvering. We're teaching them to think like warships instead of exploration vessels. Admiral Clark had arrived at Zentara Prime aboard the flagship ECS Thunderbolt, leading Earth's contribution to the Joint Defense Fleet. 20 human warships didn't sound like much against a galaxy-spanning threat, but they represented more concentrated firepower than the entire Confederation Navy had possessed before the crisis. The cultural exchange was working both ways. Human engineers were amazed by Confederation technology, particularly their ability to manipulate energy fields and quantum effects. Dr. Sarah Kim, Earth's leading physicist, was working with Vaxxan scientists to understand the theoretical principles behind their advances. Their understanding of subspace mechanics is centuries ahead of ours, Sarah explained to Admiral Clark, but they've never applied it to weapons technology. They can create stable quantum tunnels and manipulate gravitic fields, but they've only used these abilities for transportation and research. Sarah's breakthrough came when she realized that the Devourer's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. The machine intelligence used a form of quantum entanglement to coordinate their fleet movements. Every Devourer ship was connected to every other ship through subspace communication networks. This allowed them to act with perfect coordination, but it also created a vulnerability. If we can disrupt their quantum communication frequency, Sarah explained to the Joint Planning Committee, we can break their coordination. Individual Devourer ships are powerful, but they're not particularly intelligent. Their strength comes from acting as a unified fleet. The weapons Sarah designed required technology from both civilizations. Human plasma generators provided the raw power, while Confederation quantum manipulators created the specific frequency disruptions needed to interfere with Devourer communications. The device was small enough to be mounted on fighter craft, but it required getting dangerously close to enemy ships to be effective. Commander Nick Adams volunteered to lead the first test of the new weapon system. His fighter squadron had been working with Claxi pilots, learning to coordinate human aggression with insectoid precision. The target was a lone Devourer scout that had been detected near the outer edge of Confederation space. The battle was brief but intense. The Devourer ship was 3 times the size of any human fighter, armed with weapons that could vaporize a small warship. But Nick's squadron used tactics that the machine intelligence couldn't predict. They came in from multiple directions using asteroids and debris for cover, forcing the Devourer to divide its attention. When Nick got close enough to deploy Sarah's weapon, the effect was immediate and startling. The Devourer ship stopped its coordinated attack patterns and began firing randomly. Its movements became erratic and confused. Within minutes, the machine that had seemed invincible was spinning helplessly in space, unable to coordinate its own systems. It works, Nick reported back to the fleet. The disruption weapon turns them into scrap metal with engines. They can't think, can't coordinate, can't even aim properly. News of the successful test spread through the Confederation like wildfire. For the first time since the crisis began, there was hope. The ancient enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia could be defeated. The machine intelligence that seemed unstoppable had a critical weakness, but hope came with a price. Intelligence reports from the edge of Confederation space showed that the Devourers were massing for a major assault. Long-range sensors detected hundreds of ships converging on the core systems. The next battle would not be against a single scout. It would be against the full might of the Devourer fleet. Admiral Clark called a meeting of all senior commanders, both human and Confederation. The converted conference room on Zentara Prime now looked like a proper military command center, with tactical displays showing enemy movements and fleet positions. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, she began, looking around the room at the mixed group of humans and aliens. We have 6 weeks to prepare for the largest space battle in galactic history. The Devourers are coming and they're bringing everything they have. Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of the Earth Colonial Survey vessel ECS Pathfinder and watched the stars streak past as they dropped out of hyperspace. The message had arrived 3 weeks ago through quantum relay, and it still felt like a dream. The Galactic Confederation wanted to meet humanity, After 200 years of exploring empty space around Earth, they had finally found proof that intelligent life existed beyond their solar system. The transmission came from Ambassador Veltar of the Zenthari Council. His words were polite and formal as he extended an invitation for humanity to visit Harmony Prime, the capital world of the Confederation. Jake had read the message dozens of times, trying to understand what kind of civilization they were about to encounter. The Zenthari spoke of peace, cooperation, and mutual understanding. They described a galaxy where war was a forgotten concept, and disputes were settled through discussion and compromise. President Lisa Rodriguez had personally selected Jake to lead this historic first contact mission. His ship carried diplomats, scientists, and a small military escort. Admiral Susan Clark commanded the military contingent, though her role was supposed to be purely ceremonial. The president had made it clear that this was a peaceful mission above all else. As Harmony Prime appeared on the main screen, Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The planet was beautiful beyond description. 3 rings of artificial satellites orbited the world, each one gleaming like polished silver in the light of the system's twin suns. Cities dotted the surface in perfect geometric patterns, connected by streams of light that Jake realized must be transportation networks. Everything about the planet spoke of advanced technology and careful planning. The communications officer turned to Jake with wide eyes. "Sir, we're receiving docking instructions. They want us to dock at Orbital Station 7. Jake nodded and gave the order to proceed. As the Pathfinder approached the massive space station, he could see ships of designs he had never imagined. Some looked like living creatures with flowing curves and organic shapes. Others were geometric crystals that seemed to bend light around them. A few appeared to be made of pure energy contained within transparent shells. The docking bay was enormous, easily large enough to hold 50 ships the size of the Pathfinder. As they settled into the assigned berth, Jake noticed something strange. None of the alien ships showed any signs of weapons. No gun ports, no missile tubes, no defensive armor plating. They looked more like works of art than spacecraft. Admiral Clark joined Jake at the airlock as they prepared to disembark. She wore her dress uniform with full decorations, but Jake noticed she had left her sidearm in her quarters. The diplomatic protocols had been very specific about avoiding anything that might be seen as threatening. The airlock cycled open to reveal a reception committee of beings unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Ambassador Veltar stood at the front of the group. He was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. His movements were slow and deliberate, giving him an air of ancient wisdom. Behind him stood representatives of other species. Jake saw insectoid beings with crystalline wings, floating creatures that seemed to be made of living gas, and humanoid figures covered in what looked like living metal. "Welcome, humans of Earth," Veltar said in perfect English. His voice was melodious and calm. "We are honored by your presence in our peaceful corner of the galaxy." Jake stepped forward and extended his hand in the traditional human greeting. Veltar looked at the gesture with curiosity before carefully mimicking it. "Thank you for inviting us, Ambassador. We're grateful for this opportunity to meet your people." The tour of Harmony Prime that followed was unlike anything Jake could have imagined. The cities were marvels of engineering, with buildings that grew from the ground like plants and transportation systems that moved beings through tubes of pure energy. There was no pollution, no poverty, no signs of conflict anywhere. Gardens filled with plants from 1,000 different worlds created a paradise that seemed too perfect to be real. During the formal dinner that evening, Jake learned more about the Confederation's history. For 300 years, the major species of the galaxy had worked together to create this utopian society. The Zenthari provided diplomatic expertise, the Vaxon contributed their vast knowledge, the Keepers of Nyx offered spiritual guidance, and dozens of other species added their own unique gifts. Wars were a thing of the past, settled through negotiation and mutual understanding. Admiral Clark sat quietly through most of the dinner, but Jake could see she was troubled by something. When one of the Vaxon representatives asked about human military capabilities, she gave careful diplomatic answers that revealed as little as possible. The alien seemed puzzled by the very concept of a military force. The trouble started the next morning during the formal presentation ceremony. Jake and his team had prepared a detailed briefing about human civilization, covering everything from art and culture to science and technology. The aliens listened with polite interest until Admiral Clark began describing Earth's defensive capabilities. When she mentioned that the Pathfinder carried plasma cannons and missile batteries, a ripple of shock went through the assembled delegates. The Xanthari began speaking rapidly in their own language, their melodious voices taking on urgent tones. The Vaxan representatives backed away as if they had been struck. Supreme Mediator Serendil, an ancient keeper of Nyx, raised one hand for silence. Her voice was soft but carried absolute authority when she spoke. "Forgive us, humans, but we must ask for clarification. Did you say your ship carries weapons designed to destroy other spacecraft?" Admiral Clark looked confused by the reaction. "Yes, of course. Standard defensive armaments for any ship traveling in unknown space. Nothing unusual by our standards." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake watched as the aliens exchanged glances that needed no translation. Fear, confusion, and something approaching horror flickered across faces of a dozen different species. Veltar finally broke the silence, his voice carefully controlled. "Perhaps we have misunderstood something fundamental about your people. In our galaxy, we have moved beyond the need for such instruments of destruction. Our ships carry no weapons because we have no enemies. But what if someone attacks you?" Admiral Clark asked, genuinely puzzled. "Who would attack?" Serendil replied. "We have peace. We have understanding. We have negotiation and compromise. Violence is a concept from our ancient past, abandoned when we learned better ways to resolve differences." Jake felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. Humanity had dreamed of joining galactic civilization, but it seemed their very nature made them unwelcome. The humans were warriors in a galaxy that had forgotten war, soldiers in a society that saw weapons as primitive relics of a barbarous past. The reception that followed was polite but cold. Jake could see the aliens struggling to reconcile their hopes for new friends with their fear of what humanity represented. As they prepared to return to the Pathfinder, Veltar approached Jake with obvious reluctance. "We will need time to consider humanity's place in our confederation," the ambassador said carefully. "Your people are different from what we expected. Perhaps it would be best if you returned to Earth while we discuss this matter with the Council." Jake nodded, understanding the diplomatic language. Humanity was being asked to leave while the galaxy decided whether they were too dangerous to be trusted. As the Pathfinder pulled away from Harmony Prime, he wondered if this would be humanity's first and last contact with galactic civilization. 3 months had passed since the awkward first contact at Harmony Prime, and Jake Harrison found himself back on Earth, filing endless reports about humanity's failed introduction to galactic society. The Confederation had been polite but firm in their message. Humans were too violent, too militaristic, too dangerous to join their peaceful civilization. President Rodriguez had ordered all human ships to maintain a respectful distance from Confederation space, while diplomatic efforts continued. Dr. Alex Bennett was having better luck in his research. The Xanthari had at least shared their historical archives before cutting off contact, and Alex had spent months translating ancient texts in his laboratory at the Mars Research Station. What he found in those dusty digital records made him increasingly uncomfortable. The Confederation's 300 years of peace were real, but the period before that told a very different story. Alex was reviewing a particularly cryptic Xanthari text when his computer alerted him to an incoming priority transmission. The message was from Captain Maria Santos aboard the ECS Defender, one of the survey ships monitoring the edge of Confederation space. Her face on the screen was pale and shaken. "Dr. Bennett, you need to see this. We detected massive energy signatures at Talara 7 3 hours ago. When we arrived to investigate, we found something that matches the descriptions in those ancient texts you've been studying." The video that followed made Alex's blood run cold. Talara 7 had been a peaceful mining colony operated by the Vaxan, home to nearly 50,000 beings. Now it was gone, not destroyed in the sense of an explosion or natural disaster, but systematically dismantled. The planet's surface had been stripped down to bedrock in perfect geometric patterns. Massive machines floated in orbit, breaking down the planet's core and feeding the material into enormous processing ships. "Maria, get your ship out of there immediately," Alex said, his voice tight with fear. "Those machines match historical descriptions of the Devourers. The Devourers were mentioned in the oldest Confederation records, described as an ancient machine intelligence that had consumed entire star systems 500 years ago. According to the texts, they had appeared without warning, stripped dozens of worlds down to their atoms, and then vanished beyond the galactic rim. The Confederation historians wrote about them as a natural disaster that had simply ended one day, like a storm that blows itself out. Alex had been puzzled by the casual way the records discussed such a catastrophic threat. Now he understood why. The Confederation hadn't defeated the Devourers. They had simply waited for them to leave and hoped they would never come back. Captain Santos was already backing her ship away from the Talara system when the first Devourer scout detected her presence. The machine was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the Defender, with a hull that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Weapon ports opened along its sides, revealing technology that made human plasma cannons look like toys. "They're targeting us," Santos reported, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Jumping to hyperspace now." The Defender escaped, but barely. The Devourer's weapons carved through space where the ship had been moments before, leaving distortions in reality that took several minutes to fade. Santos brought her ship directly to Earth, carrying news that would change everything. President Rodriguez called an emergency session of the Global Defense Council within hours of receiving Santos's report. Alex found himself standing before the most powerful military leaders on Earth, trying to explain a threat that defied human understanding. "The Devourers are not a natural phenomenon," he said, displaying holographic images of the ancient texts. "They're a machine intelligence possibly older than any known civilization. 500 years ago, they consumed over 60 star systems before disappearing. The Confederation never fought them. They just hid and waited." General Ryan Foster, Earth's top military strategist, studied the tactical reports with growing alarm. "Dr. Bennett, based on these historical accounts, how long do we have before they reach the core Confederation worlds?" Alex ran the calculations on his tablet, checking them twice before answering. "At their current rate of expansion, approximately 6 months. Maybe less if they increase their pace." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 60 billion intelligent beings lived in the Confederation's core systems. If the Devourers followed their historical pattern, all of them would be dead within the year. "What about the Confederation military?" asked Admiral Clark, who had been recalled from diplomatic duty to help assess the threat. "Surely they have some defensive capabilities." Alex shook his head grimly. "Based on what we observed at Harmony Prime, their ships carry no weapons more powerful than ceremonial energy projectors. Their military consists of peacekeepers trained in conflict resolution, not combat. They have no experience with actual warfare." President Rodriguez leaned forward in her chair. "Have they responded to our warnings?" "Ambassador Veltar acknowledged our message," Alex replied. "The Confederation Council is meeting in emergency session, but their initial response was to attempt diplomatic contact with the Devourers." The silence that followed was broken by General Foster's bitter laugh. "They're going to try to negotiate with machines that strip planets down to bedrock." The answer came 2 days later in the form of a distress signal from the Zenthari diplomatic ship Harmony's voice. Ambassador Veltar had personally led a peaceful mission to make contact with the Devourer fleet. The transmission was brief and terrifying. "This is Ambassador Veltar of the Galactic Confederation." His voice crackled through static. "We came in peace, broadcasting standard diplomatic protocols. They are not responding to any attempts at communication. They are treating our ship as raw material. Repeat, the Devourers are treating our ship as raw material. All vessels maintain maximum distance. They cannot be reasoned with." The transmission ended abruptly. Long-range sensors detected the complete obliteration of the Harmony's voice moments later. The Confederation's response was immediate panic. Worlds that had known nothing but peace for 3 centuries suddenly faced the reality of extinction. Emergency sessions of the Council devolved into chaos as species that had forgotten how to fight tried desperately to find alternatives to violence. Some proposed fleeing to other galaxies. Others suggested hiding in deep space until the threat passed. The Keepers of Nyx offered to sacrifice themselves to appease the machine intelligence. Every solution except the obvious one was discussed at length. It was Veltar himself, speaking from his emergency shuttle after his diplomatic ship's destruction, who finally said what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to admit. "We have spent 3 centuries building a civilization based on peace and understanding. His voice echoed through the council chambers. But we have also spent 3 centuries forgetting how to defend ourselves. We are sheep-facing wolves and our shepherds have forgotten their teeth. The message that arrived at Earth 3 days later was unprecedented. For the first time in Confederation history, they were formally requesting military assistance from an outside power. The species that had rejected humanity for being too warlike now desperately needed exactly those qualities they had found so disturbing. President Rodriguez called General Foster into her office as soon as the message was decoded. "Ryan, I need an honest assessment. Can we help them?" Foster studied the tactical data with the eye of a professional soldier. "Madam President, the Confederation has industrial capacity we can only dream of, but zero military experience. They have billions of personnel but no one trained in combat. They have advanced technology but no weapons." "That's not what I asked," Rodriguez said quietly. "Can we save them?" Foster was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Maybe. If we move fast, if they listen to us, and if we're willing to teach an entire galaxy how to fight a war, we might have a chance." The president nodded and activated her communications console. It was time to show the galaxy what humanity could do when pushed into a corner. The peaceful Confederation was about to learn why Earth had never stopped building weapons, even after centuries of relative peace. Sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to be prepared for war. Outside her office window, the first ships of the Earth Defense Fleet were already preparing for departure. The galaxy had tried for peace and found only helplessness. Now it was time to see what humanity's war-ready civilization could accomplish when fighting for something worth saving. The Battle of Nexus began at 600 hours Galactic Standard Time, when the first Devourer ships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Admiral Clark watched from the bridge of the ECS Thunderbolt as her sensors registered the enemy fleet. 300 machine ships, each one the size of a human cruiser, arranged in perfect geometric formations that spoke of inhuman precision. The Nexus system had been chosen as humanity's first major stand against the Devourers for strategic reasons. It contained 7 planets, 3 asteroid belts, and a complex gravitational field that would disrupt the machine's coordination if used properly. More importantly, it was the last major system before the Confederation core worlds. If they lost here, there would be no time to mount another defense. Colonel Tim Brooks commanded the fighter squadrons that would spearhead the attack. His pilots were a mix of human aces and Confederation volunteers who had learned to fly combat missions in just 5 weeks. The Klaxi had proven to be natural pilots, their insectoid reflexes perfectly suited to the split-second decisions required in space combat. The ethereals could interface directly with their ship's computer systems, giving them an almost supernatural awareness of battlefield conditions. "All squadrons, this is Brooks," he transmitted to his mixed force of 200 fighters. "Remember your training. Get in close, deploy the disruption weapons, and get out fast. Don't try to be heroes. Every ship we lose makes the next attack harder." The Confederation fleet had been positioned throughout the system, using the asteroid belts and planetary gravity wells to mask their approach vectors. Captain Joe Martinez commanded a squadron of retrofitted Zenthari vessels that had been converted into fast attack ships. Their crews were still learning to think like warriors, but their advanced technology gave them advantages that human ships couldn't match. The opening phase of the battle followed human tactical doctrine, but with Confederation modifications that confused the Devourer fleet. Instead of meeting the enemy in a direct engagement, the joint forces used hit-and-run tactics, striking from multiple directions before fading back into the asteroid fields. Commander Grace Allen led the first successful attack run, her squadron of human fighters emerging from behind a small moon to catch a Devourer formation by surprise. The machines reacted with their usual perfect coordination, but Grace had learned to anticipate their response patterns during weeks of studying captured tactical data. "Break by twos. Attack pattern alpha," she ordered her pilots. "Remember, they expect us to come in straight lines. Give them curves instead." The human fighters spiraled through the Devourer formation like dancers, their unpredictable flight patterns making it impossible for the machines to target them effectively. When Grace's wingman, Lieutenant Ben Parker, got close enough to deploy his disruption weapon, the effect rippled through the entire enemy squadron. The lead Devourer ship suddenly stopped its coordinated movements and began firing at its own escorts. Within moments, the entire formation was in chaos. machine turning against machine as their quantum communication network collapsed. Grace's squadron finished off the confused enemies with conventional weapons before withdrawing to regroup, but the victory came at a cost. Lieutenant Megan Ross, flying cover for the attack, took a direct hit from a Devourer beam weapon. Her fighter exploded in a burst of plasma that lit up the darkness between the asteroids. It was the first human death in the battle, but it would not be the last. The Confederation crews were struggling with the psychological impact of actual combat. Many of the Zenthari pilots became physically ill when they witnessed the destruction of enemy ships. The Vaxxan crews tried to analyze each tactical situation logically, but the chaos of battle didn't follow the neat patterns they expected from their computer simulations. Captain Danny Morgan found himself commanding a mixed squadron of human and ethereal fighters when their original leaders were killed in the second wave of attacks. The ethereals were devastated by the loss of life, their empathic abilities making them feel every death on both sides of the battle. "I know this is hard," Danny transmitted to his ethereal wingmates, "but those machines will kill billions of innocent beings if we don't stop them here. Focus on that. Focus on who you're protecting, not who you're fighting." The tide of battle began to turn when Dr. Sarah Kim's improved disruption technology proved even more effective than expected. The new weapons could affect multiple Devourer ships simultaneously, creating cascading failures throughout their communication networks. When Captain Luke Thompson managed to deploy one of the enhanced devices in the center of a major enemy formation, 60 Devourer ships suddenly lost coordination at the same time. The result was a feeding frenzy, as confused machines turned their weapons on anything that moved, including each other. The perfectly organized Devourer fleet dissolved into dozens of individual battles as ships that had worked in perfect harmony moments before began destroying each other with mechanical efficiency. Admiral Clark seized the opportunity to press her advantage. "All ships concentrate fire on the disrupted formations. Don't give them time to restore communications." The joint fleet struck like a hammer, focusing their combined firepower on enemy ships that could no longer coordinate their defenses. Human plasma cannons and Confederation energy weapons worked together, overwhelming machine shields that had been designed to resist single attackers, not coordinated strikes from multiple directions. Colonel Wright, commanding a group of converted Vaxxan research vessels, discovered that the Confederation's superior sensor technology could predict Devourer movements with startling accuracy. "Admiral, we're reading quantum fluctuations that precede their tactical decisions by several seconds. We can tell what they're going to do before they do it." The advantage was enormous. Human tactical flexibility combined with Confederation technological superiority created a fighting force that the Devourers couldn't counter. Every time the machines adapted to one threat, their opponents shifted to a different approach. The climax of the battle came when Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Rachel Stone detected something that changed everything. Deep scans of the retreating Devourer ships revealed massive energy signatures moving through hyperspace toward the Confederation core worlds. "Admiral, you need to see this," Rachel reported from her sensor station. "Long-range detection shows over 2,000 Devourer ships massing near the Harmony Prime system. This wasn't their main attack. This was just a probe." The victory at Nexus suddenly felt hollow. They had defeated 300 enemy ships, but thousands more were preparing to assault the heart of Confederation civilization. The battle they had just won was merely the opening move in a much larger war. Colonel Hughes, Earth's chief military engineer, was studying the tactical data when she made a discovery that sent chills down her spine. "The Devourers aren't just planning to attack our core worlds. They're positioning to consume the central stars themselves. If they succeed, they'll have enough energy to power an expansion into neighboring galaxies." The implications were staggering. The Devourers weren't just trying to conquer the Milky Way. They were preparing to consume it completely and use the energy to fuel expansion across the entire local galaxy cluster. Billions of civilizations and dozens of galaxies were at risk. Major Wilson, analyzing the enemy's tactical patterns, realized the true scope of the threat. They've been building shipyards in dark space for the past 500 years. Every ship we've seen so far is just the advance force. The main fleet is still being constructed. Admiral Clark called an emergency strategy meeting aboard the Thunderbolt. The command staff that gathered in her briefing room represented the combined military leadership of two civilizations, but they all wore the same expression of grim determination. "The good news is that our disruption weapons work better than expected," Clark began. "The bad news is that we're facing an enemy force 10 times larger than anything we've encountered so far. Conventional defensive tactics won't be enough." Colonel Brooks, still covered in sweat and debris from the fighter battle, spoke up from his position at the tactical display. "Admiral, what if we don't fight defensively? What if we take the fight to them before they're ready?" Sarah Kim activated a holographic display showing the layout of Devourer forces throughout the galaxy. "The main shipyards are located in dark space beyond the galactic rim. If we could destroy their production facilities, we might be able to end this war before the main fleet launches." The plan that emerged was audacious beyond anything attempted in galactic history. Instead of waiting for the Devourers to attack, humanity would lead a preemptive strike directly into the heart of enemy territory. They would take every ship they could muster and assault the shipyards that had been building the Devourer fleet for 5 centuries. "It's suicide," Captain Martinez said bluntly. "We'll be outnumbered 100 to 1, fighting in space controlled by the enemy with no hope of retreat if things go wrong." Admiral Clark nodded grimly. "You're right. It is suicide. But it's also the only chance we have. If we wait for them to come to us, they'll have overwhelming numbers in the initiative. If we strike first, we might catch them off guard." Operation Starbreak launched from the Nexus system exactly 14 days after the victory over the Devourer probe fleet. Admiral Clark stood on the bridge of the ECS Thunderbolt and watched as the largest armada in galactic history prepared to jump into hyperspace. 300 ships representing dozens of species, all united under a single desperate plan to strike at the heart of an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. The journey to dark space took 18 hours, during which Admiral Clark reviewed the intelligence reports one final time. The Devourer shipyards were massive beyond comprehension, stretching across an area of space larger than most solar systems. Thousands of machine ships in various stages of construction floated in perfect geometric arrays, tended by constructor vessels that never stopped working. Captain Luke Thompson commanded the stealth squadrons that would begin the assault. His ships were equipped with the latest Confederation cloaking technology, allowing them to approach the shipyards undetected. Their mission was to eliminate the Devourer sensor networks before the main fleet arrived, giving the Allied forces crucial minutes of surprise. "Remember, we get one chance at this," Thompson transmitted to his pilots as they prepared to drop out of hyperspace. "Once we start shooting, every Devourer in the galaxy will know where we are. Make your shots count." The stealth attack began at exactly 1200 hours. Thompson's fighters emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the shipyard complex and immediately began targeting sensor arrays and communication relays. The Devourers had never expected an attack in their own territory, and their defensive systems were designed to protect against asteroids and cosmic radiation, not military assault. Within minutes, Thompson's squadron had created a sensor blind spot large enough for the main fleet to exploit. The signal went out across hyperspace and 300 warships dropped into normal space in perfect formation, their weapons already charging for the attack. The battle began immediately. Devourer constructor ships, massive vessels designed for building rather than fighting, tried to respond to the unexpected assault. But their weapons were industrial tools, not military systems. Human plasma cannons and Confederation energy beams tore through their hulls like paper, sending fragments of metal spinning into the void. Captain Danny Morgan led his fighter squadrons through the shipyard complexes, targeting the half-built Devourer ships before they could be activated. The sight that greeted him was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Thousands of machine vessels floated in various stages of completion, from skeletal frameworks to fully armored warships waiting only for their quantum consciousness to be installed. "This is incredible," Morgan transmitted to his pilots. "They've been building ships for centuries. There must be 10,000 vessels here, maybe more." The Confederation crews were performing better than anyone had expected. Months of training under human instructors had transformed peaceful explorers into competent warriors. The Zenthari had overcome their revulsion for violence when they understood what was at stake. The Vaxxan approached combat like a complex mathematical problem to be solved. The Ethereals used their energy manipulation abilities to overload Devourer systems from the inside. Colonel Amy Hughes commanded the engineering teams, responsible for planting quantum charges throughout the shipyard network. Her mission was the most dangerous part of the operation, requiring her people to board Devourer facilities and manually install explosives while the battle raged around them. Team Alpha, you're clear to approach Construction Platform 7, Hughes transmitted to her first squad. Remember, we need to reach the quantum core before the Devourers can activate their automated defenses. The boarding action was unlike anything in human military history. Hughes's engineers fought their way through corridors designed for machines, not biological beings. The passages were too narrow, the gravity too weak, the atmosphere completely absent. They had to work in environmental suits while defending against Devourer security systems that treated them as foreign contaminants to be eliminated. Dr. Sarah Kim was aboard Hughes's command ship, monitoring the deployment of her improved disruption technology. The quantum charges they were placing weren't just explosives. They were designed to create cascading quantum failures that would spread throughout the entire Devourer network, disrupting not just the shipyards but every machine ship in the galaxy. Amy, you need to see this, Sarah called from her sensor station. The quantum resonance patterns are stronger than we calculated. If we can trigger a synchronized detonation across all the major platforms, the effect will be exponentially more powerful than expected. The revelation changed everything. Instead of simply destroying the shipyards, they could potentially eliminate the entire Devourer civilization in a single coordinated strike. But it required perfect timing and synchronized detonations across dozens of platforms simultaneously. Commander Grace Allen was leading a desperate holding action near Construction Platform 12 when the Devourers finally managed to activate some of their completed warships. The machines that emerged from the building docks were larger and more advanced than anything the Allies had encountered before. These were not the scout ships or probe vessels they had fought at Nexus. These were capital ships designed for galaxy-spanning warfare. All units, we have major contacts emerging from the construction bays, Grace transmitted to the fleet. These ships are 3 times larger than anything we've seen before. Recommend immediate withdrawal to safe distance. Admiral Clark faced the hardest decision of her career. The quantum charges were in place, but they needed more time to ensure synchronized detonation. The fleet was taking heavy casualties as more Devourer ships came online. Every minute they stayed increased the risk of total destruction. Negative, Commander Allen, Clark responded. We hold position until the charges are ready. This is our only chance to end this war. The final phase of the battle became a race against time. Human and Confederation ships fought desperately to protect the engineering teams as they completed their mission. Ship after ship fell to Devourer weapons, but the survivors closed ranks and continued fighting. Captain Martinez's squadron made the ultimate sacrifice when they realized that Devourer reinforcements were approaching Platform 7 where Colonel Hughes was still working. Without hesitation, Martinez led his ships directly into the enemy formation, using their own destruction to buy precious minutes for the engineering teams. Tell my family I died protecting the galaxy, Martinez transmitted as his ship's hull began to buckle under enemy fire. It was worth it. Lieutenant Ben Parker and Squadron Leader Megan Ross, flying the newest prototype fighters, managed to penetrate the inner defenses of the primary construction facility. Their mission was to plant the final quantum charge at the heart of the Devourer network, the central core that coordinated all machine intelligence throughout the galaxy. The core chamber was a sphere of pure energy suspended in space, surrounded by geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. As they approached, both pilots could feel the weight of machine consciousness pressing against their minds, trying to understand these biological entities that dared to challenge the perfect order of artificial intelligence. Ben, I'm reading massive energy buildup, Ross reported as they approached the deployment point. The quantum patterns are becoming unstable. We need to plant this charge and get out now. Parker's fighter took a direct hit from the core's defensive systems. Just as he reached the deployment zone, his ship was dying, but he managed to manually deploy the final quantum charge before his fighter exploded in a burst of plasma and debris. Charge deployed, Ross transmitted, her voice tight with grief and determination. All teams prepare for synchronized detonation on my mark. Dr. Kim watched her instruments as quantum charges throughout the shipyard network came online. The energy patterns were building toward a crescendo that would either save the galaxy or destroy everyone within 1,000 light-years. All ships, withdraw to minimum safe distance, Admiral Clark ordered. Amy, Sarah, are we ready? Charges synchronized and ready, Hughes reported from her position near the edge of the facility. Quantum cascade will begin in 30 seconds. Sarah, what are our chances? Clark asked quietly. Dr. Kim looked at her readings one final time. Honestly, Admiral, I have no idea. We're attempting something that's never been tried before. The quantum cascade could eliminate every devourer in the galaxy, or it could tear a hole in space-time large enough to swallow several star systems. Admiral Clark made her decision. All fleet units initiate quantum charge detonation in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, execute. The explosion that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. It began as a single point of light at the heart of the Devourer core, then expanded in all directions at speeds that defied physics. Quantum energy cascaded through the shipyard network, jumping from platform to platform, spreading through the subspace channels that connected every Devourer facility in the galaxy. The Allied fleet watched from their position at the edge of the explosion as space itself seemed to fold and twist.